Do you hit a wall mid-enduro race? Here's exactly what's happening, and here's what you need to do so you can enjoy your riding and racing a little bit more, because it sucks when you hit the wall, especially for enduro. Motocross, if you're doing a 20-minute race and you get halfway through a race and you hit the wall, then you've only got to suck it up for 10 minutes. When you get halfway through a 3-hour enduro, an hour and a half is a long time to be able to suck it up for. And the other thing with enduro is generally, even if you do decide to quit and you don't want to keep going, you still need to get back to the car and get back to the pit. So whether you want to quit or not doesn't really matter, because you still have to get back to the trailer. So what is hitting the wall? So hitting the wall is where you are riding or racing and your body's performing at a certain level. And as you're going through the race, like our fitness, our strength, our endurance drops off automatically, okay, as we use more energy. But what happens when you hit the wall is it might drop off like this, and then all of a sudden it goes like that. So for an enduro race, you might get, say, an hour in, and then you go and everything feels okay, and then bam, it's like everything hits you all at once. You've got no energy, you feel fatigued, you're not riding well, everything becomes 10 times harder, and you're like, what the hell's happened? That's hitting the wall. So to pull apart what is actually happening, first of all, you've got to understand what's happening with your body and why it's happening. And then when you're fixing it, then it becomes a lot easier because you understand how your body's working. So I'll do a quick little bit on how it works. So the main fuel source that you're using when you're riding and when you're doing enduros is carbohydrates. Carbs are your main, primary, best fuel source for your riding and racing. So that's what we use, like fuel for your bike, right? So when we ingest carbs, so we can take in things like, could be, say, lollies, could be potatoes, could be pumpkin, could be rice, anything that's a carbohydrate. What happens is it comes into our body and it increases the amount of glucose, the amount of sugar that we have in our blood. And what happens is if that's not used straight away, is that gets pulled out into our muscles and stored as what's called glycogen. So imagine your muscles as like a fuel tank for energy for your body. It's going, hey, we've got all of these carbs, all this energy coming in, but we can't actually use it at the moment because I'm not even doing any exercise. I'm just having carbs for breakfast. Then what happens is the muscles pull that glucose out of the bloodstream into your muscles and they store it for later. It's like a storage tank for your energy that you can use later on. And so what happens is when you do need that energy later on and you're exerting yourself and exercising really hard or riding and racing, training, then it pulls that glycogen out and allows you to be able to use that energy for whatever you're doing. So that's the cycle and that's how it works. Now what happens when you're hitting the wall is that supply of energy that you have in the muscles is depleted, it's gone, and it hasn't been topped up. So imagine like, to use an analogy, think about your bike, right? There's the fuel tank which holds all the fuel. And then there's the fuel that's actually in the motor, which is doing the work, which is being burnt and doing all the other stuff to actually make the motor go. The fuel that's in the fuel tank isn't making the motor go. The fuel that's actually in the motor is making the motor go. But what happens is once the motor burns through the fuel that it's got in there, it then goes, hey, we need more fuel, we need more fuel. And it pulls it out of the fuel tank into the motor so that it can keep the motor working. Your body's the same with carbs. Is the glycogen, the stored energy tank is like your fuel tank, and your glucose is the fuel that's actually in your body, actually in your system that you're actually using. So when that glucose is being burnt through and it starts to drop, what happens is it starts to pull that energy out of the fuel tank, out of your muscles, into your bloodstream, so that you can use that energy when you're riding to be able to keep up the level, like keep up what you're asking your body to do. Now hitting the wall comes is when that energy tank, that tank empties and it's gone. There's nothing left. So imagine riding your bike, right? Like I'm sure we've all had it at some point where you've been riding your bike and it runs out of fuel. What happens? The bike dies, right? The motor doesn't work. It goes from working all of a sudden and it's performing like this, and then your bike hits the wall. There's nothing left because there's no fuel in the fuel tank. It can't go. You can try and tip it sideways and get a bit of fuel in there and it might fire up and go for a little bit, but other than that, it's not going to work. And so your body works the same way. That's the hitting the wall for your body. So, what we need to work on then is making sure that you have, number one, your fuel tank full, so your glycogen stores full in your body, so your fuel tank is ready to rock and roll and at 100%. But then you also need to know how to top it up throughout a race. So for a motocross race, you don't need to top up throughout the race because the races are so short. For an enduro race, the races are very, very long. So you need to be topping up because your glycogen stores are going to be chewed through. You're going to be tapping through all of that fuel that you have in the muscle, and you're going to run out. So you have to have a strategy to top it up so that we want to have the fuel tank at 100% before we start the race. We know we're going to chew through it during the race, but we want to have points where we can top it up and get it back up, back up, back up, so it's always as close to 100% as possible. The other problem that happens when you hit the wall and you are depleted of your carbs, which is your primary fuel source, is you'll find it hard to keep hydrated. And so that's when you start to cramp up as well, and feel dehydrated and get lightheaded and not be able to focus, and your mouth's a bit dry and all the rest of it. And the reason is carbohydrates actually hold water. So it's in the name, carbohydrates, okay? Carbohydrates hold water in them, so they help to keep your body hydrated. So when you have depleted your body of carbs and you've used all that energy and your energy tank is empty, now when you're putting water and liquid in, your body has nothing to hold on to, okay? So think of it like a sponge in your body. When your body has carbs in it, it's got a sponge there to absorb the water and hold on to it and keep you hydrated. When that sponge is gone, the water just goes in and out. And it's just flowing through, just flushing everything out. It's not actually helping you to be able to keep hydrated. So that's that. It's very hard to recover from once you have hit the wall. I would say almost impossible, because what's happening is you've burnt through that fuel tank, right? So let's say you're doing a 3-hour enduro and you've got 2 hours in, right? And you've hit the wall at the 2-hour mark and you're like, my body's just cooked, your performance has dropped off like that. You've still got another hour, okay? The only way to be able to fill up your fuel tank and get it back to 100% is to be able to rest, stop riding 100%, take a break for a few hours, get a whole heap of carbohydrates in, give your body enough time to be able to get those carbs in, digest them, convert them into glycogen, which is a lengthy process when we're talking about like filling up your whole body with carbs, not just getting a little bit in. That takes time. It's like filling up your car at the petrol station, right? It takes a certain amount of time to be able to fill up the car. It's not an instant fill. You have to stop the car. And so what happens is if you're riding and you're still riding and trying to put fuel in and riding, you're just running on fumes. You're just putting like the bare minimum amount of fuel in to be able to keep you going a little bit. You're not at 100%. Your battery's not fully charged. So the only way to do that is to stop, to give your body the time to replenish itself, recharge, charge, get that battery, get that energy tank back to full, and then you're going to be able to go again. So that's why it's really important to be able to make sure that you prevent this from happening at all costs. You don't let it happen and then go, oh, I'm fucked, and then, how do I tackle this now? What do I do? You've got to make sure that you do everything possible beforehand to prevent it from happening. And so now that you know how carbs work, it's going to make sense to you when we go through the next part, which is what to focus on to prevent it from happening. So with your carbs, you want to use what's called carb loading. So what carb loading is where we're putting carbohydrates in 24 hours before we go and race, sometimes a little bit longer, because what we're doing is we're loading up our body, we're loading up our muscles with carbs because they're our fuel tank. Making sure that we have as much glycogen in those muscles as we possibly can so that we're ready for our racing day. So how do you do that? So let's say you're racing on Sunday. On Saturday night, you want to make sure that you have a good serving of protein. You can have some fat, so you can have like some meat, a bit of avocado, but you want to make sure you have a really good serving of complex carbs. So complex carbs are things like sweet potatoes, brown rice, quinoa. You can even use pumpkin, you can use oats. These are good carbohydrates that are high in starch, that are going to take a while to be able to break down and digest, that are going to allow you to fill up your glycogen stores. We want to do the same thing for Sunday morning. So roughly 4 hours before you go and race, again, you can have a serving of protein. Don't worry about the fats for breakfast on Sunday, but we want to have a good serving of those complex carbs again. Throw out the whole, I need to have cereal, or I need to have this, or I need to have that. This is the stuff your body needs to perform. So don't worry about like what are breakfast foods and what aren't breakfast foods. Focus on, all right, I'm going to race today. What do I need to have to be at my best? Really important thing to make sure that you're having it 3 to 4 hours beforehand, because if you have it too close, your stomach's going to be full of food because they're complex carbs. They take a while to digest and break down. They're not easy to break down for your body, which is why we need to wait 3 to 4 hours. So once we've done that, we've done the night before and we've done the morning, we should have our glycogen stores, our muscle stores full. So our fuel tank for our body should be full at that point at 100%. What we're going to do half an hour before we're going to go and race is we're going to give ourselves a glucose spike. So the way that we do that is we use sugars. You can use a carb gel, you could use some lollies. Personally, it's not really my preference. I find them a little bit hard to like digest and have, and they're a bit sticky. But anyway, up to you. If you want to have them, you can have them. But otherwise, a carb gel or like a bottle of Powerade. You want 30 to 50 grams of carbs half an hour before you go and ride. So now we've got our glycogen stores full at 100%, and we've also spiked our glucose. We've spiked our glucose in our bloodstream because we know we're going to use that energy straight away, okay, when we go and ride and when we go and race. That's why we're not having lollies, 3 or 4 hours before and the night before, because it's not going to work. So once we've done that, we've now spiked our glucose, we've got our glycogen stores at 100%, we're ready to rock and roll. So when we go and race, we want to top up our carbohydrate stores by 30 to 50 grams of carbs for every hour of riding. Okay, so every hour of riding, you want 30 to 50 grams of carbs. You want to get these through sugars or through simple carbs. So the best way to do this is using either a sports drink or a carb gel. Carb gels could have anywhere between 20 to 40 grams of carbs. You have to check the back of the packet. So you might have to have 1 or 2 every hour. A bottle of 600ml bottle of Powerade is 35 grams of carbs. So you'll need to have a bottle of Powerade every hour. So depending on the type of enduro racing that you do, depends on the strategy. So for our guys, for desert racing guys, because it's fast and very high speed, it's quite hard to be able to get the straw in your mouth while you're doing 140 kilometers an hour and be able to get all the Powerade out of your Camelback. So what we recommend for our guys that do desert racing is they use the carb gels at their fuel stops. Put them in their pack or strap it to the fuel drum, get all your carbs in every time you do a fuel stop. On the other end of the spectrum for hard enduro guys, it's the opposite. You spend a lot of time wrestling the bike around, stopping and starting. It's very slow because it's very technical and hard. That's why it's called hard enduro. So in that scenario, you don't want to be stopping more because you're already probably doing a lot of stopping and starting. So in that scenario, that's where you can put Powerade in your Camelback and be able to get your carbs in that way. But it's just important that you hit those numbers. You have to hit that 30 to 50 gram mark for every hour. Common mistake that I see is riders will do the stuff beforehand. They make 2 mistakes actually. One mistake is they'll do the stuff beforehand. They'll do the stuff the night before and before the race, and then they go and race and they just have water and they hit the wall and they wonder why. It's because your fuel tank was at 100%, but you've chewed through all the fuel and then you haven't topped it up. There's no top up strategy. On the other side, we have riders that do the opposite. They don't do any of the stuff night before or in the morning, and they have the carb gels and the Powerade during the race, but their glycogen, their fuel tank wasn't at 100% to start with. It was only at 50%. So what that means is they run out of energy very, very quickly, even though they're doing the top-up strategies, because they didn't start off at 100%. So that's how you tackle hitting the wall. If you're hitting the wall, it's a nutrition problem. Like, yes, there's things with training that you can work on that you can do, but when it comes to training, it's going to be a drop-off like that. It's going to be a consistent drop-off. When it's a hit the wall like that, it's like exactly like your bike running out of fuel. You notice when your bike runs out of fuel because it doesn't go anymore. That's what's going to happen with your body when it runs out of fuel as well.